Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. Today we're talking about the Corruption Sorcerer, the spec that is pretty straightforward, however it has a surprising amount of complexity, especially if you don't know how your abilities are interacting with each other. So let's hopefully clear the air with this video. Two brief disclaimers: I'm not an expert on the spec, I'm just a nerd. I play a lot of SWTOR. If there's anything that I missed, or if you leave them down in the comment section below, I'm sure your fellow players will appreciate it. Secondly, sword healing is an art, not a science. Your job is to adapt to different situations as they arrive, so I won't be teaching like a rotation because one doesn't exist. However, I will be equipping you with the basic understanding of what your abilities are doing and how you can be applying them. So let's jump right into it. First, for our tertiary stats, alacrity, 7.2% alacrity, and you should be ready to rock and roll. Throw everything else into crit and you should be golden. We don't need any other stats as a healer. For our tactical, one for all is pretty fantastic. The extra roaming rend heal is chef's kiss. We love to see it. I personally like to run Unmasked Haste for the extra polarity shifts. It's pretty nice. And I like to run Revitalize for the extra heal. Frankly, a lot of these Sorc legendaries are kind of garbage, so these are just kind of the two that I find the most success with. But some people like to run the one that gives you the extra the extra crit chance with the Dynamic Force, which gives you the extra recklessness. It's good, but personally I like the passive heals of Revitalize more. For our combat style, if you remember, I just talked about how Sorc is a art, not a science. We run into that right away. I personally like Rally more. I think it does a lot more group healing, which is very nice. However, if you're only doing single target heals, you could take Fueled Corruption for sustained single target heals. If you need very quick burst healing, you can take Haste for the single target burst. Personally though, I find Rally to be the most consistently useful across my forms of content. Pick as you see fit. However, Cloud Mine is just the best overall. Take it pretty much every single time. Dark Resurgence is pretty darn fantastic. It's going to spread your Resurgence to 4 allies every time you use an Innervate. It's very, very good. Take this pretty much every time. Unhindered Resolve is great for solo content. If you get into operations, you can take unlimited power for the big group benefit. It's kind of like your duty as the healer to be group team player, so you should probably take unlimited power. However, in single content or war zones, you can absolutely take Unhindered Resolve and be fine. Force Mobility is fantastic. Take it pretty much every time. Surging Speed is pretty darn nice. Some people like Unnatural Vigor. I personally enjoy the extra mobility of Surging Speed. That's just me. Phase Walk is kind of the go-to here for PvE and PvP content. However, some people like to take Whirlwind for the extra CC. It's kind of up to you. Again, art, not science. Finally, Immersion is great for PvP, and Corrupted Flesh is great for PvE. That's kind of all basics of what you need to know. This is the build that I personally run because I enjoy these abilities the most. However, adjust as you see fit, especially down here in Tier 1 and then up here in Tier 68 as well. It's kind of up to you. Now, if you are leveling as a healer, you need to understand the basics of your damaging abilities. So let's talk through those very, very quickly, and then we'll actually talk about healing. Your big damaging abilities are going to be Crushing Darkness, which is a long cast, but does a whole bunch of damage up front. And then we take Force Lightning, which does, 30,000 damage over the course of a relatively long cast. That is a relatively short cooldown. That's single target. And then you fill with Lightning Strike and Shock until you have these abilities back. So Crushing Darkness, big damage, Force Lightning, moderate damage, Lightning Strike, and Shock to fill, and then just repeat until the end of time. If there are more than 2 targets in the area, you should just take the Force Storm button and then hit Force Storm. And then when that's done, you're going to hit Force Storm. And then when that's done, you're going to go ahead and you're going to hit Force Storm again. And you're going to repeat that to the end of time until the targets are all dead. So one more time for those of you who are going to be leveling. Crushing Darkness, lots of damage. Force Lightning, lots of damage. Fill with Lightning Strike, and Shock, repeat, AoE with Force. Oh, where is it? Force Storm, over and over and over again until everyone is dead. So that's the basics of doing damage as a Corruption Sorcerer. Let's go and talk about actually doing, healing. All right, healing as a Corruption Sorcerer is actually pretty straightforward, and we rely on 2 foundational abilities here. The first of which is our Static Barrier. Static Barrier will absorb about 30,000 damage for the target. So say I apply a Static Barrier to Jorgen, he decides to go run off and stand in 30,000 worth of damage. The barrier would absorb that damage and allow him to not take any damage, which is pretty nice. Additionally, when we apply our barrier to the target, they're going to get these stacks of Sustaining Darkness. Now, Sustaining Darkness will heal them for 1.5 thousand times the amount of stacks that they currently have on them. So right now, he'd heal for like 15,000 health when his barrier collapses, which is pretty nice. However, the more I heal the target, the fewer stacks he gets. So just know, if you see that number of stacks going down, they're going to heal for a little bit less because you're healing them. But for the most part, we really don't worry about that number. Just know, barrier collapses, they heal for a little bit. It's pretty darn nice. However, you can't just spam this ability. I can't just be applying barriers to him over and over and over again. Players get this little debuff called Deionize, which means that you cannot apply another barrier to them. So unfortunately, Jorgen, you only get one 30,000 absorb shield every like 20 seconds or so. Let's see, yeah, about 15 seconds, so I'm sorry. So you can be spamming this on all of your players. It'll help them survive damage for the next 30 seconds. That's how long the barrier lasts. It's pretty darn nice. So as a general thumb, try to keep your barriers up on as many players as you possibly can, so that way when they go and do something stupid, the barrier is them to save them from their own best, their own shortcomings. A lot of what healing is saving players from their own stupid mistakes, so barrier helps us do that preemptively. The second most important ability we have is our Resurgence. Now on the surface, Resurgence doesn't do a whole lot for us. Resurgence heals us for like, 6,000, not great, not terrible, heals us like 13,000 K over the next 15 seconds. It's not that impressive. Why is it so important? It's important because we get this little buff here called Force Bending. Force Bending will essentially supercharge all of our other healing abilities. We want to be spamming Resurgence as much as possible because it's going to be supercharging all of our primary heals. We'll talk about how these interactions take place as we discuss the other heals. Just know that when I say supercharge, it means we has used our Resurgence, and then we're going to get this massive buff because we have our Force Bending. All right, so spam Resurgence as often as possible. Like, that's the one thing that most sword healers will agree on. Be spamming Resurgence. It really makes your other buffs or your other heals very, very useful. But what are those other heals? Well, let's talk about them one by one. The first and most obvious is going to be our Roaming Men. Roaming Men will place a heal on a target, will heal them for like 15k, and then when the target takes damage, it'll bounce to the next player. When that player takes damage, it'll bounce to the next player, up to a total of 5 times. So if we're doing the math, 15k, 5 bounces, it's like, 45,000 healing. It's pretty darn nice. However, there is a way we can supercharge this. So instead of waiting for me to sit around here and take damage, that's kind of lame. If we use our Resurgence and supercharge it, it'll instantly jump around. So you can see now, if I use my Roaming Men, it bounces to 5 players back to back, and does a whole lot of healing. It's kind of your oh shoot button for instant heals. It's very, very strong. Usually I only use my Roaming Men when I have it supercharged to get that instant buff of healing a whole bunch of players very quickly, or oftentimes it'll just bounce back and forth between tanks. It is a smart heal here, so it's not just like bumping around randomly. It'll go to the target that needs the healing, which is pretty darn nice. So as a general rule of thumb, use a Resurgence, use Roaming Men, and it'll heal essentially 2 or 3 players that are in desperate need of health very, very quickly. The second most obvious single target heal that we have is our Innervate. Innervate does a couple of things for us. Let's talk about them one by one. For one, Innervate will heal the target over the course of a 2.5 second cast for a fair bit of healing. It's very, very nice. Additionally, whenever Innervate crits, you're going to get these buffs here called Force Surge. Now, what Force Surge does for us is it makes our Consuming Darkness essentially free. Consuming Darkness is our force recovery mechanic. Especially in this class, you have the opportunity to really botch your force management. If you get down here to low force, you're not going to be able to do as much healing. So, what Force Surge does, which is this little, yelling orange guy, what this does is that means we can use our Consuming Darkness and instantly get back a whole bunch of our force without having to sit around and wait. It's what makes Innervate very, very strong for us. So not only does it do, a fair bit of healing on its own, every time it crits, it generates a little bit of the Screaming Force Surge guy, which means that we can get our easy force management with our Consuming Darkness, so that way we don't sit down at one force and be sad. However, we can supercharge this, and if we apply our Resurgence, and we can take a look at the buff, you're going to see that when Resurgence is applied, Innervate's critical chances increase by 25%, which is very, very strong. So not only are we going to have, strong extra Innervates, we're going to get those extra stacks of our Force Surge to help with our force management. essentially, innervate, extra force management, right? Innervate crits means we get stacks of Force Surge, means we get extra consuming darknesses, which means that we're not going to be sad and letting our players down. So let's recap very quickly. Barrier, all players, protects them. Absorb shield, very good, free healing. Resurgence supercharges all the healing, or essentially all the other healing abilities that we do, very strong. Roaming Mend on its own applies to a target. The target takes damage, heals another target, target takes damage, heals another target, target takes damage, heals another target. However, we can supercharge this using our Resurgence, which is very, very strong, and then that instantly will have Roaming Mend bump around and heal players back to back to back. Very, very good. Innervate, single target heal. Blah. Every time Innervate crits, it'll give us these little, screaming orange guys, which means that we can use Consuming Darkness to help with our energy management. When we supercharge our Innervate, it has an extra 25% crit chance, which means, hey, very, very strong extra screaming orange guys that we can use to consume darkness and then essentially stabilize our energy management. Additionally, remember the utility that we took here called Dark Resurgence, which means that if we have Resurgence on the target, then if we use our Innervate, Resurgence will spread to all the targets in the area, which is very, very nice, assuming that it works properly. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So let's try it again. There we go. Resurgence is now ticking on all the fellow players. Very, very good. Resurgence on target, hit Innervate button, and then the Resurgence should spread to all the players in the area. Essentially, free heals. It turns single target heals into big AoE heals. Very, very nice. Good? Good. So, we've talked about the basics of supercharging a Roaming Mend. We've talked about what happens when you innervate a Resurgence target. It's going to spread that Resurgence all to all of our fellow friends around here. Very good. But what if we need like actual AoE healing? Well, then we have our Revivification. Revivification is a big old AoE heal here that has a 2-second long cast time. Not great, not terrible. However, it will heal everyone in the area for like 17,000 health very quickly. It's very strong ability. And when we supercharge it using our Resurgence, it makes it instantly cast. So now instead of that 2-second cast time, I can just boop, plop down a Revivification and then get a whole bunch of healing very quickly without the risk of getting interrupted or having to move. So, one more time, Resurgence into Revivification means big instant AoE heals, very strong. Additionally, Dark Heal is now glowing. Every time you use a Revivification, it is going to make your Dark Heal start to glow, which means that we can click our Dark Heal and use it for free. We will only be casting Dark Heal when it is glowing like this. Essentially, especially at the end game here, if Dark Heal isn't glowing, we don't care. It doesn't do enough healing, to be frank. It's kind of sad. It's a massive force suck. There are way better abilities that we could be using over Dark Heal. So instead, whenever it is glowing, then we can sit here and worry about casting it. It's going to do essentially more free healing without a cast time. So Dark Heal glows, hit it. That's really all you need to know. And what makes it glow is using Revivification or our Rally. Rally is a single target big burst heal that has a relatively long cast time. This is also known as Dark Infusion. However, I take Rally because Rally heals 2 players instead of 1. However, it functions essentially the same way. You can see here, single target cast, 1.5 second cast can heal a player for like 45k. It's very strong. It healed actually 2 players for 45k. It's very, very strong. It also makes your Dark Heal start to glow, which means it is great for single target back-to-back heals. You can go Rally and then right over into a big fat Dark Heal, assuming that the cooldown is off. There we go. But Rally can be supercharged by using our Resurgence. So right now it's like a 1.9 second cast. That's kind of a long time. We can shorten that by using a Resurgence and then a Rally to have a 1.5 second cast. Now, frankly, Rally is really only used for single target burst heal situations. It's not uber useful otherwise because it is kind of a long cast, but it's there if you need it in a pinch. Now, that is all the healing abilities that we have as a Sorc. Let's run through them one more time because repetition. Barriers on everyone. 15-second cooldown between you can put them on again. Absorbs a bunch of health or a bunch of damage. It's very strong. Resurgence on its own, moderate amount of healing. Not great, not terrible, but supercharges all our other abilities. We want to be smashing it as often as possible. Our main healing abilities, Roaming Mend on its own. Target takes damage, heals the target, jumps to another player. Player takes damage, jumps to a target. That's too much time for me. Instead, what you can do is you can supercharge it with Resurgence. Once it's supercharged, that means that Roaming Mend will now instantly jump from player to player, blah, 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 doing a whole bunch of healing at once. In a similar vein, Innervate, throw it on the target, does a moderate amount of healing, spreads our Resurgence for free, very nice. Gives us extra stacks of Force Surge, which means that we can recover our force faster using our Consuming Darkness. When we are supercharging it with Resurgence, it's going to give us an extra 25% crit chance on our Innervate, which means that we get extra stacks of these Force Surge, which means we get extra stacks of Force Management. It's very, very nice. When we need big AoE heals, we can use our Revivification at a long 2-second cast, which is, not great, not terrible, but it also makes our Dark Heal instant cast and glow, which means we can actually click it, which is very nice. Or if we want to supercharge it with our Resurgence, supercharge it, instant cast Revivification, boop, instant big AoE heals, very nice. And then again, Dark Heal, when it glows, hit it, that's all you need to know about your Dark Heal. Finally, big single target heal in the form of Rally and or Dark Infusion. It's the same ability. Usually has a rather long cast time, but if we supercharge it using Resurgence, then Rally only has a 1.5 second cast. It's very, very strong. I wish there was more I could be teaching you about a healing rotation. In general, a good opening flow is to go into Resurgence and then Roaming Mend and then an Innervate. That's going to do a whole lot of single target healing. It's going to do a fair bit of AoE healing with Roaming Mend, and it's going to spread our Resurgence around. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Additionally, just be smashing Resurgence on cooldown, and then be spamming your Roaming Mend, Innervate, your Revivification, and your Rally pretty much whenever the healing is required, and you should be good to go from there. Sorry, that had a little incident here. So those are the basics of actually doing healing as Sorc. In fact, just hit the glowing green buttons, you kind of be good to go from there. But there are some methods that we can use to augment our healing ability. For example, we have our Recklessness. Recklessness gives your direct heals a 60% chance to crit, which, if you might imagine, pairs very nicely with, say, our Innervate. So now, if we are ever down in the dumps in terms of our actual force, we can use our Recklessness right into our Innervate and then get essentially 3 free stacks of Force Surge to help us generate that force very, very quickly. Additionally, we can be using these on our single target heals, say a big old fashioned Rally would be good, but in general, I try to use my Recklessness with an Innervate, so that way it helps me manage our force a little bit better, because this spec does like to consume all the force in the world, so just, be careful with it. Additionally, we have our Polarity Shift. Now, Polarity Shift on its own, it's an okay offensive cooldown. However, it has a relatively short cooldown, so that means it can be up relatively often. What it does is that it makes you get 20% alacrity, which means all of our healers are going to be casting faster. You can see here an unbuffed Rally is casting at 1.6 seconds. It's very nice. A buffed Rally will cast at 1.2 seconds. It's a great way to get quick heals out. That way, more healing faster means less players dying. So we want to be spamming our Polarity Shift pretty much as often as possible, or whenever there's massive damage coming out. Additionally, every time that you hit the Force Speed, because of the legendary that we're taking over here, the legendary we're taking, that every time you use your Force Speed, Polarity Shift's cooldown reduces by 5 seconds. What this means is that you can get a Polarity Shift once every minute or so. It's an easy way to be generating a whole lot of alacrity, which means a whole lot of extra healing, which means a whole lot of force management. Just be spamming your Force Speed and your Polarity Shift pretty much on cooldown for now, especially in the learning phase. Once you start to figure out this is when the damage is happening, then you can start to save your Polarity Shift. But frankly, use your offensive cooldowns. Use your big buffs. Don't let them sit around in your trade doing nothing. Please be smashing your offensive cooldowns. That way you do more healing. That way you get used to actually using them instead of just hoarding onto them like Smog. No, just hit your Polarity Shift, hit your Recklessness, buff your abilities, do more healing. It's going to be a good time. Now, in terms of defensive cooldowns, we don't really have a lot. We have our Static Barrier on ourselves, which is, pretty good. We also have our Cloud Mine, which will reduce the damage that we take by 25%, so not great, not terrible. We also have God Bubble, called Force Barrier. Force Barrier is a little bit of give and take. Force Barrier, you apply it to yourself, and now you can't move for 8 seconds. Now this is very dangerous for a healer because while you're not doing anything, your entire group is dying. So like, be careful with this. It's mostly used as like a cheese mechanic. Additionally, it is a way to purge extra stack of Consuming Darkness. For those of you who don't know, when you use extra stacks of Consuming Darkness and you don't have the buff, you're supposed to get these extra stacks of Weary, which will slowly reduce the rate of force regeneration, which is an easy way to easily botch all of your force. You can see here, I'm not regenerating any force because I have all these stacks of Weary, which is why these stacks of Force Surge are so important, because we get these without stacks of Weary. If you use a Force Barrier, we purge all those stacks. So if you need to, in a pinch, you can just Consuming Darkness your way all the way back up to full, use a Force Barrier, and then you'll have natural force regeneration. TLDR, no force, spam Consuming Darkness, Barrier, and then have force. All right, that's the dummy version of that. Finally, we have our Phase Walk. This is what I personally like to take. Phase Walk, you set it down one location, you run around, you can run it 60 meters away, and then boop, you hit Phase Walk again, you teleport back. This is great for dodging people in like PvP, so that way you're not sitting around here thinking, oh my goodness, I have to sit here and take all this damage. No, you have an option to teleport away. It's very, very nice. It's also useful for several mechanics in operations, especially as the healer. You have to do a lot of those mechanics because, well, the monkey DPS are too busy hitting the boss and the tanks are too busy getting hit by the boss, so it's kind of up to you. So, TLDR, hit the glowing green buttons. All right, just hit the green buttons over and over and over again. They do healing in different varieties. Use Resurgence on cooldown because it supercharges your glowing green buttons. Very, very strong. Defensive cooldowns. Be spamming Static Barrier on your friends. They'll thank you for it later. You have Cloud Mine at your disposal for like general DCDs, and then your Oh Shoot button of Force Barrier if you need it. And then please be spending your Polarity Shift and your Recklessness because, frankly, you do more healing that way. Very strong. The last ability we need to talk about is Expunge. Expunge is your cleanse. Please, 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 please. Use your cleanse. Use your cleanse. If you cleanse a target and it removes a debuff from them, that's less healing that you have to do later. Now, I'm sure everyone's heal parse looks great when you don't cleanse, but that's not the way you clear content. You clear content by preventing your team from taking damage. Please use your cleanse. That's like the first thing that new healers need to learn when they're first getting into this stuff. So use your cleanse. All right. I think that's all I have for now. Let's go hop into an effort and we can kind of demonstrate all these abilities in action, because it's one thing to sit around here in a stronghold. It's another to actually, dive in and see it in action. So 2 seconds. All right. As a healer in the opener, frankly, most of the time there's not going to be a lot for you to do. Most of the time the boss doesn't open up, coming out, swinging out the gates and doing a whole bunch of damage. So you can kind of get away with doing some off DPS in the meantime. You can throw your Creeping Terror on the target. You can throw both your dots on the target, do a little bit of damage here, a little bit of damage there, and then the fight will really get going. And then you have to like sit down and think, okay, actually probably should start paying attention to doing the healing. Now we're kind of just following the core principles here that we talked about before, where we supercharge using Resurgence 24/7, and then use our big ol' heals as often as possible to keep our group topped up. However, healing is not just about hitting green buttons. Healing is about crisis management. It's about looking at the current encounter and seeing, okay, this is going to kill my group, this isn't going to kill my group. So in the case of like a Nim Nephra, understanding that the dot is what's going to be what kills your group. So prioritizing cleansing that dot over, just making the health bars go to full is way more important. Unfortunately, the only way to really develop those skills is to slowly but surely learn the fights and be paying attention to when the tanks are taking a lot of damage. For example, right now they're kind of just sitting here chilling. They're not in that much danger, but if they get up to high, let's say like 3 stacks, suddenly, okay, they're in danger, put heals on them. This only comes with experience for right now, especially if like you're watching a guide on how to play sword heals on the internet. Make that health bars go to full. If you see a dot, cleanse it. All right, if you can understand those basic concepts, you should be fine. Prioritize healing your tanks over your DPS, because your DPS shouldn't be taking damage. If they are taking damage, it's probably their own fault. So keep your tanks happy and you should be ready to roll. Again, you can see here that force management in this spec can be a little dicey at times, especially if you have to kind of pump. So taking advantage of those 3 stacks of red men to get back that force very quickly while my dog loses his mind back here. Relax, bud. Is very, very important. So, other general rules of thumb as a healer. For one, the most dangerous thing to your entire group is not the actual boss. Yes, the boss is going to be the one that's making the health bars go to 0. The most dangerous threat to your entire group is your DPS. This is someone who has played DPS for 10 years now. DPS are morons, all right? They believe that their health bar is now your problem. They need to take some responsibility for that. And to correct those course of actions, we apply this thing called Flame. Because as a healer, it's your job to tell your moron DPS, hey, you did a really dumb thing and made my life very hard. Please don't do that dumb thing again, because it botches the rest of the encounter. This works for 2 reasons. The first is that we are correct. Their mistakes making our lives harder is not a lot of fun. For 2, every DPS lives in constant fear of one day being benched to healer. And if they mess up enough, one day they will be forced to heal, and they don't really want to. So threaten them with this course of action. You kind of have to play Team Mom once in a while. It just kind of is what it is. So you can see here, the raid is in desperate need of AoE healing. What can we do? We can apply our massive revivification to the raid to apply a whole bunch of AoE heals. We can be applying our Wandering Men to get that big AoE heal out. But now, crisis management. What's the most dangerous thing right now? Tank dying. Most dangerous, then cleanse. Again, crisis management, making sure you understand where the threat is coming from. It kind of is what it is. Unfortunately, when it comes to healing, you're not really in control of your own destiny. Yes, we can apply monster heals and help people survive their terrible mistakes, but sometimes, frankly, we just kind of have to sit back and watch the chaos unfold. Say a DPS does something astronomically stupid and doesn't cleanse themselves when you ask them to repeatedly. Say a DPS stands in fire when he really shouldn't be, or they're not doing enough damage. Or say the tanks do something like overlap their taunts on top of each other, and then they both get one-shot by the boss because that's the mechanic. And then you have to sit back here and watch as your group crumbles apart when Nephra's at 2% health. These things kind of just happen to healers. It's just kind of part of the ride. So, unfortunately, you're not always in control of your own destiny. It is what it is, but we can always flame our players into being better. So if you have any questions about applicable flame, I have many years of ranked experience to help you out with. I'm happy to provide any details. But that's kind of all I have for healing in the Sorcerer Corruption spec. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, or I'll hire a team of professional turbo virgins to come over here and actually, give you the full detailed answer. It kind of is what it is. But if you guys have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, etc., feel free to let me know down in the comments below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. I hope you have a fantastic day. That's kind of all I have. Take care now. Bye-bye.